everybody, so today we're going to learn a little bit more about some of the plant propagation methods that we've been talking about in class, specifically cutting, rooting, and grafting your plants so that you can take an existing plant and make many more copies of that plant to grow at home. There are two different types of propagation. The first type is sexual propagation, which is when you use a seed to create a plant that is genetically different from its parent plant. We've already talked about seeds, so we won't be really talking about this here. Asexual propagation is when you divide, cut, or graft tissue from a parent plant to create a genetically identical new plant that can grow on its own. Sexual propagation results in a plant, like I said, that is not genetically identical to the parents. It combines characteristics from two different plants. These plants can be highly variable. They will be different from their parent plants. And generally, this is used by plant breeders when they're trying to develop a new plant with different characteristics. Maybe they have one plant that grows really big, but it doesn't grow very tasty fruit. And you have another plant that doesn't get very big, but it grows amazing fruit, and you want to combine these to try and get both of those characteristics into one plant. Asexual propagation has many different methods. The most important thing about asexual propagation is that the baby plant will be genetically identical to the parent plant. So if you have a plant that's doing really well, that has characteristics that you really like, you can use asexual propagation to create a genetically identical plant. The first option is the simplest, and it's division. Some plants, when you look in the soil, they have many different sections that all have their own roots. And as you see in the picture, if you pull those sections apart carefully so as not to destroy the roots, you can plant each stem and root cluster individually to create new plants. This often is done with house plants like snake plants, irises, prayer plants, and daylilies. The method that we are going to be most interested in is cuttings. Cutting propagation can use root cuttings or leaf cuttings, as well as stems from hardwoods. It requires a lot more time than division because you will get a smaller version of the plant that has to grow and become larger. Not all plants can be propagated by cutting, but many of the ones that we're going to think about can. There are many different types of cutting: herbaceous, softwood, hardwood, and semi-hardwood. We're mostly going to be focusing on herbaceous, things that have soft stems and soft leaves. We don't really have the time or the materials to make new trees. With herbaceous cuttings, you will take a small piece of the stem that has some leaves on it. These leaves are important because they have to continue doing photosynthesis, and you will remove the leaves from the bottom 1/3 to 1/2 of the stem, leaving these little nodes where the leaves were growing from. Those nodes are where actively cells are being made. Hardwood cuttings are different. If you think about a tree, the stems on the tree are very hard. They're very, they don't grow very fast, and they're often dormant, meaning they don't show a lot of signs of active growth. This is a very different type of propagation that we won't be considering right now. Herbaceous tip cutting, which is what we will be doing with foods from the grocery store, is a lot easier. You're going to choose green, non-woody stems for this cutting. So if you look at these here, I believe this is maybe mint. the bottoms of these stems can get very hard and very brown. You don't want to use that. You want to use areas of the plant that look nice and green and fresh. The important thing is to have at least a few nodes. Nodes are our important vocabulary here. This is where the leaves grow out, and since the leaves are growing from this spot, that means that new cells are being made and new growth can happen here. So you want to remove leaves from at least one, preferably two nodes, and these nodes are where your new roots are going to grow from. Another type of root cutting or asexual reproduction that you could choose to do involves something called rhizomes or tubers. These root cuttings or tubers will produce new shoots, meaning new green parts that will come out of the soil, as well as their own root system. Rhizomes are things like strawberries and ginger, as you see over here, that will grow under the ground and put up a bunch of different stems so that it looks like multiple plants, but it's actually just one plant growing from beneath. You can choose to propagate ginger if you have enough space and if you have a warm environment. A tuber is another word for a big root, like a potato. So these tubers will grow off of the stem into their own little pockets of food basically for the plant, and from each of those new stems will arise. So you can take a potato that has eyes on it, those white things poking off, and cut off chunks of the potato that have an eye, plant it in some soil, and it will grow a new plant that will produce new tubers or potatoes. Grafting is a way to take an existing plant that is not producing very well and add a better stock from that tree that is producing better fruit. What you can do is you can take stems from a very nice, healthy plant with good fruit and insert them into the bark of an existing plant. This way, the strong structure of the existing plant can help to feed the new branches that are going to be creating the fruit. Whatever you do, whichever method you choose, you have to make that grow new roots so that it can successfully become a new plant. There are many different options, but what's important are the following things. There must be lots of moisture. You do not want your plant to get dry or it will stop growing new tissue and new roots. And oxygen is required for all living things. So you have to make sure that your water or your soil has enough oxygen so that your roots can grow and your plant will be healthy. It is also important that your environment is very clean and sterile. You're using nice fresh soil or nice fresh water so that bacteria can't get in through the open wounds that you've created in this plant by cutting it. So you have to make sure your environment is moist, has lots of oxygen, and is clean and sterile. The rooting media that we will likely choose is water. Plain water can be used to propagate cuttings, as you can see in these pictures here, for most plants. But it is very important that the water is changed frequently, almost daily, because the water can get stagnant, which means kind of still and maybe even a little bit stinky, and it will lose its oxygen as the plant uses that up, and this will stop the roots from growing. Sometimes you can use root hormones, but this is not something that we're going to be doing because these are hazardous materials, and putting them into the water supply can be very dangerous and can cause growth of plants in places where we don't want plants to grow.